Yeah, okay, great. All right. Well, it's just after 5:30 now, so we will get started. Welcome everyone. My name is Jenna Gobrick. I'm the community and marketing specialist here at Capstone. And today we have an awesome author interview discussing diversity and awareness in early chapter books. Feel free to ask us anything. The Q&A is open, the chat is open. Feel free to be part of the conversation. That's what today is about. This webinar is being recorded. You will receive a follow-up email with any resources that we spoke about, the slides, and the recording. And please feel free to join the conversation on, Twitter or whatever social platform that you use. You can tag us at Capstone Pub, and #learning is for everyone. I am joined here today with my colleague, Miriam. She is over at Content Strategy at Capstone, and she'll be moderating this conversation today. We're also joined by our amazing special guest authors. We have Bryan Patrick Avery, the author of Mr. Grizzly's Class. We have Saadia Faruqi, the author of Yasmin and Ali the Great, and Anita, Nahta, Amin, the author of Ria Rai. And we're very, very excited. We like to start every webinar or session internally or externally by talking about our purpose, which is we help kids succeed by making learning fun. And we also like to cover our core values. We let curiosity lead the way. We own it. We are a welcoming and inclusive team. We turn problems into opportunities, and our hearts and minds are committed to our purpose. In addition to today's webinar, we do have a new webpage that you'll be able to find all of our upcoming events and webinars. You can register, you can watch recordings, and my colleague Shar just dropped that link in the chat, so please feel free to view that at your convenience. Next up in the For the Love of Reading webinar series, we have Capstone's Joe Burns. He's very well known for his Science of Reading sessions. So if you've ever seen one of his sessions, same awesome guy. He'll be going over the power of choice and the purpose of authentic text to foster that love of reading. Our friend Shannon McClintock Miller, who we just had a webinar with her last night, and she was the first session in the For the Love of Reading webinar series. She made an awesome visual here for all of you to kind of see each author's series here. And if you're interested in the books, we will send this out with the link, and you'll be able to see all of the books, whether they're hardcover or interactive ebooks. We're also giving out a little Capstone Community Kindness Kit. We've been giving these out all month long. They're just awesome to, promote kindness in your classroom, library, or home. If you'd like to win a kindness kit, we're choosing 3 winners for today. 2 winners will be chosen if you can post on social your favorite takeaway from this webinar, or, what was your favorite part of the discussion, or anything that you feel like really spoke to you. You could just tag us at Capstone Pub and use #Capstone Community. We'll also be choosing someone, random from the attendance today. And with that being said, I will hand it off to you, Miriam, to guide the discussion.
Thank you so much. And thank you all authors and also anyone attending for being here. To kick us off, I'd like to kind of frame our introduction, and I'm going to start with Anita, actually. So you have instilled a lot of your own life experiences and passions into the stories of Ria Rai, like her love of engineering and traveling the world. And I wondered if any of you found sneaky ways to kind of insert yourself into the books and into the characters that you write. So I know, Anita, like I am not going to know every single thing that you've snuck into Ria Rai books. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and what you've written, and then maybe something we wouldn't know you've utilized from your own life to inspire your stories. So
Oh,
Anita, I'll let you
sure.
start.
Mm-hmm. So I'm Anita Amin, and I write children's books, nonfiction and fiction, and short stories. And I have a STEM background, so I have degrees in biomedical and electrical engineering, computer engineering, and a background in molecular genetics. So I like to share that with children through my writing. And as a female engineer, I was I was one of a handful of engineers in college and at work about 30 years ago. And so that's important to me, particularly in the Ria series, that there's a strong female character who was interested in STEM. Even the last 4 years, the Society of Women Engineers came out with some statistics, and only 25% of females are engineers, and only 10% are women of color. So it's really important to me to be able to share that with children who might be interested in STEM. And Ria is a kid inventor who, follows her archaeologist parents around the world and finds lost Indian treasures using her inventions. And she likes to use the different phases of the project requirements, testing, requirements design, testing, and implementation. So she goes through that, those requirements. And then also, I like to share my culture, through my writing. I'm a second generation Indian American. And so, I like to infuse some of my experiences through my travels abroad, in India and overseas in other countries. The Ria series are, for instance, placed in India, Greece, Italy, which I've been to, and Egypt, which I have not been to. I hope to be there, to go one day and visit there. But some of my experiences would include, like, the mustard fields. Whenever we went to India, we would always pass these beautiful, rich yellow mustard fields. And so I have that in Ria, and The King's Treasure was the first book I wrote in the series. Or some of the food. And I always love the, bangles and the bindi, so that I incorporate those kind of things in the books. And then just like a small thing, I sometimes incorporate some of my fears, in my characters. So for instance, Ria is afraid of the dark, and a lot of these fears are kind of common to all children. So hopefully it's a universal thing that kids can connect with. So she's afraid of the dark. So things like that. And she wears glasses like I do. I'm not wearing them right now, but sometimes she finds them limiting. And that there's a scene in The King's Treasure, actually, Ria in The King's Treasure, where she has trouble because she's diving and doesn't have her glasses on. So those are some examples.
What about you, Saadia?
Yeah, you said sneaky ways. I don't feel like I'm sneaky at all. I'm Saadia Faruqi. I write the Yasmin series, and which has been out for a while. I think there are 24 books in the series now. I feel very ashamed. I don't remember the exact number, 24. And the new spin-off, Ali the Great, which came out very recently. And I think because Yasmin has been around for so long, I talk about her so much and I write about her so much, pretty much everybody knows. But in case you don't, Yasmin, the main character, let's see if you haven't met her. She is this little girl here. She is based on my daughter. So my daughter, who is 14 now, she's a teenager, but when she was little, I wrote us one book called Yasmin the Explorer, and I kind of copied my daughter exactly in terms of how she looks and how she acts and how she feels and thinks and everything, except for the name. I decided, she's going to grow up one day and be upset with me for doing that, so I chose a random name. And that one book became a whole series. So there is so much in there. The family is kind of like my family. She is like, this second grade version of who my daughter used to be. So I'm not sneaky about it. It's like very out there and very obvious, but all of the stories are, situations that kind of have come up, just thought about. So, but as far as like Anita, culture, religion, not as much religion, but more the cultural aspects. Well, religion too. Yasmin's mama wears a hijab like I do. Their family's from Pakistan, like I am. So all of those things that are kind of my identity and my children's identity are there in the books, and that's that's why maybe people love kids like the books, or maybe that's not why. Maybe it doesn't really matter what your identity is, but it's nice to have those little markers or identifiers just to be like that makes you who you are.
Bryan, you're last
Yeah.
this time, though.
So like Saadia, I'm not sure how sneaky I am either. But hi, my name's Bryan Avery. I write the Mr. Grizzly's class series, as well as a few other series. I write primarily in the early chapter book space, but also for middle grade and chapter books. With Mr. Grizzly's class, I tried to create a class that was a little different than the class I grew up with. I did not grow up in a very diverse class at all. I went to an elementary school of about 600 kids. My brother and I were the only two African American kids in the entire school. And there wasn't a lot of other diversity in the school either. And so, in creating the class, which I had to do at the outset of the series, because in each book, there's a class picture. And so I had to create all of the names and their backgrounds and all of that. I tried to create a really diverse class. In terms of things for my life, so I like to have a lot of fun when I write. And so a lot of the names of the students are actual names either of my family members or friends or different things like that. So I have a book called Bobby's Story. Bobby, though nobody calls him that, is my dad. My dad's name is Bob, and so I named him after that. There's also a kid named Annie Barbera. My mom's name is Barbara Ann. And so I do things like that because it makes me smile. I actually, so like Saadia, I snuck my daughter into the books. So in Bobby's story, at the very beginning, he comes running down the street and he runs into a teenage girl named Ashley, who is my daughter. And unlike Saadia, I named her Ashley. And Ashley's favorite color is purple. And so I had her in complete purple from head to toe and all of that, and even had her braids and everything. And so when I actually got the illustrations, that was probably one of the more emotional moments for me with all of my books because it looks just like her. And so that was really cool to be able to give that to her. So I like to do things like that. And then on the flip side, so Mr. Grizzly's class came out at the start of the pandemic. And so I did most of my school visits virtually, and I still do. So it's hard to tell because I'm sitting down, but I'm really, really big. And so I'm 6'3", 240 pounds. So I'm the size of a football player. And so when I see kids, and I did a school visit in person last week, I tower over the kids. But I'm also very aware that that's intimidating for people, whether they're children or adults. And so in creating Mr. Grizzly, I wanted a teacher who towered over the kids. I wanted a teacher who was Black, and a lot of people would say, hey, this giant black guy is scary, but I wanted him to be kind and caring because I wanted readers to have that experience of a kind, caring, gigantic black man, that would maybe dispel kind of the myth of him being dangerous and so forth. So that's kind of what I do. And like I said, it makes me smile when I write and when I look back at the books. And it's fun to kind of talk about as I meet with readers and with their parents to kind of talk through those things.
Thank you. I feel like your daughters could start a support group or a club for kids whose parents have put them in
Oh my
books. Anita,
I
did you
mean,
have?
and Bryan, same with my daughter. I have pictures. I show the picture of her as a little kid with the Yasmin. And it's like you can't tell the. I don't even know how the illustrator got it so right.
Yeah.
It's very strange, but cool. Although 14-year-olds, they don't think that's cool. They think it's like a big injustice that has been done to them.
My mother also wrote about me in one of her books, so it's a phase, I promise. I think it's cool now, but at 14, definitely not.
Yeah. It doesn't also help that I have a giant sized cardboard cutout of Yasmin in my office who I talk to. And so often it's like, you love her more than me. Why are you talking to her? Why aren't you talking to me? She doesn't talk back. That's a plus, she's like the model daughter who doesn't who doesn't have anything negative to say, but it's cool. It's cool. Capstone sent me that big poster when the book first got published, so I still have it, and that's my sounding board.
We can take responsibility for any friction that will be liable. Actually, I'll stick. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I also put my kids in the book. I didn't forgot to say that, but I put my kids in the first book actually, but just as minor characters that aren't able to make it actually. So now I feel like I should have made them bigger and made them have bigger roles.
Did you give
And
them the same names and everything?
I gave them the same. My twins are AJ and Asha, so their names are in the King's Treasure, and my husband is the toy maker in the Secret Workshop, the last book that I wrote in the first series.
Oh, I had no idea. Wow. How about that? Um, so I'll move on to the next question. And just a reminder for anyone who's attending, feel free to use the Q&A button if there's anything that you're wondering. But shifting gears, I think a lot of us are familiar with Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop's essay in 1990, Windows, Mirrors, and Sliding Glass Doors. And if we're not familiar with the essay itself, I think it's just part of the conversation. We talk about how books for kids can be mirrors that represent themselves back to themselves. And they can be mirrors that show other ways of living in the world. And then they can also be sliding glass doors, which allow readers to step into new worlds. And I'm curious to know, and I'll direct it at Bryan first, if you remember the first children's book that you felt was a mirror to your own experience and to your own identity and how that felt.
Yeah. So, well, I'll give the disclaimer in the middle of my answer. So when I was young, I loved to read. I still do. Reading was very, very important in my family. And so I read a lot, probably more than is healthy, maybe, if that's possible. But I read a lot. So much so that I loved the Bobbsey twins as a kid. And I read all 65 of them when I was in second grade. And I was crushed to discover that there are series that just end. Like nobody's writing that anymore. And so I went on and I read Hardy Boys and a bunch of other things, and I kind of sort of ran out of things to read, which is weird sounding because it's like, finishing the internet or something, right? Um, but I sort of did. And so I got my hands on two books in the summer between my third grade and my fourth grade year that I will say right now, and this is the disclaimer, are not appropriate for kids going from their third grade to their fourth grade. So one was Lawrence Block's The Burglar Who Loved to Quote Kipling. Um, and the other was Richard Wright's Uncle Tom's Children. And I didn't realize it when I picked the book up, but as I read it, I discovered it was the first time, other than, reading a history book about Martin Luther King Jr. or seeing Black people in an encyclopedia, that I was really reading about Black people in a book, in a work of fiction. And even though they were primarily folks who were in the South and in the East, and I grew up in Northern California, just reading about other Black people and dealing with racism, which was something that I had to deal with in California, and the racial violence and different things like that, it was really eye-opening to me. And so Richard Wright really became one of my favorite authors. And really, those two books, including Lawrence Block's book, really drove me to keep reading and to want to be a writer. And so I moved on from Uncle Tom's Children to things like Black Boy and Native Son. But that really sort of sparked the drive to write and to tell stories, because I looked around and I realized, I went to the library all the time. There were not many books about Black kids in the library. And that was in the 80s and 90s. And so that's really what drove me to want to do that and to write more.
Did you read Native Son when you were in fourth grade then? Was that the next
I
logical
think I got to
step?
Native Son. I think I got around to Native Son the summer after fourth grade.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
I'll ask a follow-up question actually while I've got you, which is, do you remember the first book you read or the first book that stuck with you that was a window or a sliding glass door into a world that was completely different from yours?
The Bobbsey twins, and I think that's a
Yeah.
part of what I loved about it. Is you had these twins. So first of all, I was fascinated by the fact that they were twins because that was just something like I had no experience with that. There were no, even now thinking back, the entire 8 years I was in elementary school, I don't remember there being like a set of twins there. Um, but there were some twins who lived like a few doors down from us in our neighborhood, and they were like the only twins, and they were totally different from one another. They were maternal twins, so they were identical, but they were just totally different personality wise and all that, which I always thought was strange. And so reading about these twins, it was kind of like, oh, like Timmy and Teddy. But their experiences and all of that were just really, really fascinating to me. And so that's what kind of drew me into that series and kept me wanting to read. I mean, I liked the mysteries, all of that, but the kids themselves were just fascinating to me.
Well, then, speaking of twins, Anita, do you remember a book that for you was a window that you loved, and then what was a mirror that you loved?
Mhm. So maybe a window. I really loved the so these are for younger kids, the Bedelia series,
Mhm.
because she was an outsider, sort of like myself in a way. I was my family was one of the first Indian families in Charlotte, North Carolina. So I was also one of the few Indian kids of Indian origin, in my school. So I always kind of felt like an outsider. And trying to fit in always, and so it was interesting that, Amelia Bedelia was this sort of an outsider, always doing everything backwards, but then suddenly everything would be okay with her lemon meringue pie, so I like that, it was always a happy ending, and everyone still sort of, liked her despite all of her flaws. And the Boxcar Children, I loved that series also. That was also a window of mine. Again, they're sort of, outcasts in a way. But they're still, I don't know, just something about them that I really loved, watching their adventures and how they were a family, and they were close to each other. A mirror I didn't really have, honestly, until I started reading to my own twins, picture books, because there weren't any. I couldn't find any books of featuring a character of Indian origin, in anything as I was growing up. Which would have been, I was born in '69. I don't mind saying that. So '70s and '80s, we just didn't have, that many families from India coming over. But the Wheels on the Tuk-Tuk was the first mirror probably that I saw or read, to my kids. So I really like that. It was nice to be able to share some of our Indian heritage with the kids. And it was in a relatable way because, the wheels on the bus, they had already learned that at school. So I really liked seeing that.
I love that book. I'm so glad they got to read it. Yeah. Um, Saadia, what about you? What have you found to be a window and a mirror in your childhood reading experience?
So I will preface this by saying that I have a very bad memory. I can never remember like titles of anything. Kids always ask me, what's your favorite book growing up? And I'm like, listen, I can't remember what I read last week. I read a lot, but just books. Although Bob Sequence, that's the first time I've ever had another adult tell me that they also liked, like that's something that I thought was my memory was faulty, or I used to read these books about the Bobbsey twins. What was that? But yes, me too. Um, so it was different because I had like kind of almost similar experiences with the mirror and window situation because I did not grow up here in the US. I'm an immigrant. I grew up in Pakistan. And so on one hand, there were a lot of books that were about people like me. The local books, they were mostly, I read Urdu, which is a language that's really similar to Hindi. Although there are other regional languages there too, but that's what I read somewhat. And I saw myself and my family and my culture all the time when I read those books. But it wasn't my first language ever. I grew up speaking English also, and so I gravitated towards books written in English, mostly British authored books, because Pakistan used to be a colony of the British, but also some American books. I remember Sweet Valley Twins, and then older Sweet Valley High, and some classics as well. Um, so to me it was kind of, and that was nothing, that was a mirror to me, something that I could say, oh, this is about somebody like me. At the most there would be, some weird colonial book where the servant looked like me or the slave looked like me, and I would be like, I don't want to read this. But it was more, I couldn't understand as a child that dichotomy, that there's some books where I'm present and there's some where I'm absent, and how are they both? It was obvious there was a language that was the difference, and because I like the English books better, because I gravitated towards that language better. My studies were all in English. I went to a convent, Catholic convent, so it was kind of where I was more studying and reading those books. So it was very, I didn't get it. I didn't understand it. And now I think back, maybe that kind of, made me very confused as a child. I don't know. But it was what it was. It wasn't until I came to the US as an adult. I came to this country at the age of 22, and then I wasn't reading anymore. I was in college, but then I had kids, and my kids, when they started getting to the age of reading, and we started going to the library, and then there were all these English books, and I kind of had this, moment where I said, well, this is familiar. There are no books in this language about kids like me. And even then, my son, who's older, read everything and he was fine with it. But my daughter, who's younger, she often would kind of put her foot down and say, I don't want to read these books, especially at that age of early readers. And she once said to me, I don't like any of these books because none of the people are like me. And I thought, well, how did she figure this out? I never figured this out as a child. And that's why I wrote the first Yasmin book, to give her something that she could kind of, I didn't want her to say that anymore. So there's the one book like that. So it was kind of, back and forth. And so no one book that was a mirror in a window. I think it kind of just went back and forth for me a lot.
Yeah, it's tricky. You gave an interview, or you did an interview with Collaborative Classroom a few years ago, and I go back to this interview all the time. I love it. And you mention the absence of happy stories about Muslim characters and any marginalized people, and you say that a lot of the stories that you see get a lot of traction are issues books, as you call them, and they're
Yeah.
important, but sometimes they marginalize people further. And I wonder if you could say more, and if you could talk some about the role of joy and the unspectacular and everyday representation of characters like you've done with Yasmin.
Yes, and that's not just true for Muslim stories. That's true for, like you said, stories about any group of people that are not the majority, just, any marginalized group, where our identity becomes the problem, or identity becomes the story, it becomes the plot, where, and I write books like that too. I thought when I started out in children's writing that I would only be writing happy stories like the Yasmin books. But then as my kids grew older, I started seeing that they were going through a lot of things that were about their identity, where their identity was there as a problem. And it was sad to see as a mother, but it was there and it was fact. And so I kind of had this, moment in my writing career where I had to tell myself that, look, it would be nice if all the stories about people like me were awesome, funny, good stories, and then the identity was just there in the background and nothing to do with the plot. But that's not how my kids are living. And I I should at least write something where it is that issue is the book, the story. And so my books for older kids are like that, where um it's about who you are as a Muslim, as a brown person, as an immigrant or a first generation person, as a person of color, as an outsider, all of those things. And that's the story. And the problem though is that then you become the spokesperson for that. You become this one person who suddenly is seen as having the answer to all the questions that anyone can have about your entire religion or your entire race. And that's so unfair. I mean, it's not fair to the kids who are our readers. It's not fair to authors. So I personally feel like I'm stuck in this situation where, sometimes now I write a new manuscript, which is just a happy story. And I will have, some publisher or editor ask me, but can you put something else in there? And, but I don't want to do that all the time. It's a difficult burden to carry. But I feel like it's still part of my job because my readers go through that. How can I complain when my readers go through that? So I try to have a balance of the happy stories as well as the issue stories.
Bryan, I noticed you nodding. Have you experienced something similar?
Oh, absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think like Saadia, I have approached writing for children, trying to fill kind of a space where there's happiness and joy, because I think it's still that's still a big gap when it comes to writing for, what we refer to as marginalized communities. Is there's this expectation that the stories are going to be about struggle and strife and all of that, and sometimes kids are just kids and they're doing stuff and they're having fun and they're living their lives. And kids don't want to spend all of their time having to fight a battle, right? And yes, they do have to fight those battles, but sometimes they want to break from that. And so I think it's really important to just have kids who are doing stuff and just having fun and laughing and smiling and living their lives. And one of the things I've really appreciated, writing books for Capstone is I've always been allowed to do that. Is to just write stories that are centered on kids, and they may be working through a problem where, or something like that, but it's not about their identity. It's the normal problems that kids have. And I think that's really important. Like we were talking earlier about windows and sliding doors. I think as important as it is for kids who look like me to see kids who look like them in books, I think it's important for kids who don't look like me to see people who look like me in books, right? And I think one way to do that is to create stories that are centered on joy, that are accessible to everyone, and that show, hey, these kids are just like me. And I think that's one of the things we lose when we center stories around racism and struggle and all of that. We lose the fact that these kids, yeah, they come from different backgrounds. Yes, they have different experiences, but at their heart, they're just like us, right? And we lose that if we fail to fill that space with happiness and joy.
It reminds me of, I think, a lot of the themes in Mr. Grizzly's class where you take issues of self-awareness and conflict resolution and identity and combine the narrative with a lot of social and emotional learning opportunities. I'm
Yeah.
wondering how you see SEL fitting into stories of representation and multicultural awareness
Yeah.
specifically.
So I always look at social emotional learning as the way that we develop, and frankly, there are adults going through this too. So it's not just kids, right? Um, but social emotional learning helps us learn to interact with the world around us in a positive and constructive manner, right? But one of the key components of social emotional learning is self-awareness, right? And so you can't ignore the world around you, um, but you also have to learn how to kind of deal with it and adjust and so forth, and understand that you don't want it to overwhelm you. And so, one of the books, the student is completely overwhelmed, right? And she can't figure out how to stop worrying about all of these other things. And there's all this other great stuff going on around her that she's missing. Right. And so what I try to do in the books is I try to make sure that, they're seeing these kids work through issues There may be other things going on in the background. Like I said, there's a ton of diversity in the class. And I know as an adult, I'm sure those kids are dealing, right? There's probably a kid dealing with some issue at home. I mean, all of those different things. We know that's going on, but I try to focus on one sort of positive outcome in each book. And so, like in the case of Mordecai's Magic, Mordecai is the new kid in class, and he's not really sure how this is going to go. And all of these kids have these extensive backstories that don't show up in the books because they're early chapter books and you can't delve too far into it. But he's worried, right? And so that's why he brings a backpack with all of his magic stuff in it, because that's the only way he can figure out, like, hey, maybe I can relate to kids through this because this is me, right? And so having things like that and being able to say, okay, so I'm not just the new black kid in the class. I'm Mordecai. I'm a magician, and he uses his skills to find a way to kind of save the day for the class. And so by the end of the book, he sort of introduces himself to the class through his magic and who he is. And it gives him more of an identity, I think, than just, hey, I'm the new black kid.
Anita, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I definitely think books in general can help with, help kids build emotional intelligence. I think that's really important. When kids are going out and interacting with other kids, that they know how to, how to treat others fairly, how to react, if they're being bullied, and also how to react if things aren't necessarily going their way. So a lot of my books with the characters, I hope I give them the power to the power of failure, so specifically, like with the Ria Rai books, I have the Ria Rai book, I didn't show it yet. This is the secret workshop, but she has this step-by-step process in developing her inventions, and she doesn't get it right the first time around. She goes through several failures. So I hope that teaches children that it is okay to fail. Especially in Desi society and in the Indian society, the failure is it's a lot of kids are afraid to fail. I know I was afraid to fail, because success is so rooted in society. And it also comes from the immigrant experience, that my parents, I can't speak for everyone, but I know my parents came, and they didn't have much when they came. They came for school, and they wanted us to succeed and not have to go through the hardships that they did. And they were also sending money back to relatives in India. So it was a harder life, even though they both have 2 master's degrees, each. We were encouraged to be engineers or doctors. It felt like, we had to do well in school. We had to go to a good college, we had to get a get a good job. So it's like, and it's where are you allowed to fail in there, basically. So I that's what I hope, with my books that I hope with my kids too, that I encourage failure to some degree, so that they can learn from that. And so.
Yeah, oh, it's absolutely necessary. I'm still terrified of failure, and I feel like a book at a younger age could have maybe intervened in that, but here we are. Since time is winding down, I have 2 more questions left, and I think there's only time for one of them. So I'm deciding the more uplifting question is the right pathway. So I'm sorry if any of you are really itching to talk about book bans, but I think we'll maybe leave that on the side for today. But since you're all pretty prolific at this point, I'd love to know if you've received any feedback from readers who have seen themselves in your work or who are seeing a window into a new character's life through your work. And if there's any feedback that's really stuck with you and been meaningful, whether it's about the value of seeing difference or about the love of reading, or if it's just something kind of silly that's stuck in your mind, I think that's always kind of a positive to end on. And so, Saadia, we can start with you if you wouldn't mind. except I think she's frozen. So like I said, Anita, why don't we start with you?
Oh. Okay, so actually, one of my picture books, Raja's Pet Camel, I do a lot of virtual reads also to classrooms. So I had read this picture book to a classroom. It's about a boy who wants to keep his pet camel. It's set in India. And then the class sent me thank you notes, like an online thank you note, and one of them was a video from this little boy who had just moved from India. It was so cute. I saved it because I look at it when I need encouragement sometimes. And he said, since I've moved here, India is like a different world. And the fact that, you read this book and you're from India is really cool. And he goes on to, to talk to me about India and, share, he says, how to say hello and there are many languages in India. So, he goes on to talk about that, but I think in a way he felt, almost validated, his being from India and his background. So that really touched me, and I love listening to, hearing that from time to time.
Oh yeah, no, that's priceless. What about you, Saadia? What's a piece of feedback that stuck with you?
Okay. There's a lot. There's a lot. I'm very grateful. My books have been, going on for a long time. And so I travel a lot to schools. And so I'm very lucky that I get that feedback, that I get to meet readers. So I get quite a bit of, comments, and oftentimes the interesting comments are more from adults. Say I do a library visit, and it's families that are attending, kids, but also grown-ups. And the number one comment always is, we wish we had these books growing up. And, so they feel like that book that's just for, say, a 7-year-old, it actually becomes a book for the whole family. So I love comments like that. A couple of times, I will mention two that recently. One that happened just a week, 2 weeks ago. I was in Indiana, and one of the schools that I'd gone to, they had done some kind of contest where they had given out index cards to their students and asked them to all write a little note for me, and then they had put on the library wall this big poster board, and everybody's little notes had been pasted on there. And then they had done, whoever wrote the best note would get a free book. So they were all excited, and they wanted to know, they'd sent in all their best. Some had written artwork, but mostly there were little letters, and I read all of them, and most of them were like, very a lot of words, a lot of amazing things that they'd written. I love those. And there was this one, I actually shared it on my Instagram too. If you are online, you can look at it because it really spoke to me. All the index cards were like full, of writing of these kids. And there was one that was not. That was one that was, it just said salam, which is hello in Arabic. And then it said, I'm Muslim too. And then the third line was, I love your books. And to me, that was just so, that was, that just, it showed her emotion, her emotion. I think it was a girl because I think she had her name there too. The emotion of this writer was there, that, it was something that she had picked up, that kind of related, and who knows what she felt with her identity, that she felt that was something that she wanted to write. So she didn't win the prize, but I love that. Another thing that happened during COVID, probably because this was a virtual visit, and this was a class of second graders, and it was in a state that there were almost everybody in that school, in that classroom that I met, was white. And this kid comes up to me after in the QA question answer, and he goes, second grader, blonde hair, blue eyes. He's like, so excited. He wants to say something. He goes, I love Yasmin. And I said, okay, why? And he goes, No, he said, I love Yasmin. She is just like me. And I kind of like, paused because obviously they were like two very, very different. This kid is nothing like Yasmin to me, at least, and what I thought. And so I asked him, what do you mean? Why is she just like you? And he goes, she likes soccer and I also like soccer. And one of the books I guess they were reading was Yasmin the Soccer Star. And that really resonated with me for the opposite way of from my first example that I've given, that we can find that one thing that can make us love a character or a book, even us as adults. And it can be because that person is just like us, or it can be because that person is like us in a way that other people don't think so. So it was those are kind of the ones that I repeat a lot, but I'm very grateful. I get a lot of messages, I get a lot of mail. That reminds me why I write.
Yeah, that's so necessary. And then, Bryan, we'll let you finish. I know you were just at a school visit, so maybe you have a lot of
Yeah.
recent
So
examples.
anybody who's done school visits with first and second graders a lot knows eventually you'll lose control of a room. And that happened to me one time reading Mr. Grizzly's class. And but it was really cool because it started with a kid wanting to know, I think it was Shaw was kind of in the background. We were reading Mordecai's Magic. It was Shaw. And so they were like, well, so Mordecai does magic. What does Shaw do? And that's what I said. Well, Shaw likes to sing. And so there's a book called Shaw Solo and all of that. And it sort of like Saadia was saying, here was a kid who looked nothing like Shaw, but was like, oh, okay, I'm Shaw then. And like one by one, these kids started going, okay, well, what does she do? What's her name? And so we went back to the school picture that's at the front of the book and kind of talked through the characters and what they were. And here were these kids who looked nothing like the characters, but were saying, oh, okay, well, I'm going to be her then. I'm going to be him then, because they could relate to things that they liked or that they enjoyed or to their backgrounds or things like that. And so it was a really cool thing. And I think really demonstrates that if we write books and we show these kids, readers will resonate with them. They'll find something. And it doesn't have to be their race. It doesn't have to be their gender. There are things that they can find and that they can relate to. And it also helps them relate to one another, because then what I saw is the kids were like grouping together, like, oh, I didn't know you like to sing and stuff like that. And so it was a way that also they could relate to one another. And so I just thought that was really cool. And so now when I do my school visits, I always start with that picture and I talk a little bit about some of the kids in the picture. I mean, I don't go through all 20, but some of them and kind of what they do and what they enjoy doing before we start reading the book, so that the kids can kind of get an idea. And it's happened again since then, is kids can really start to relate to that. So that for me is a big part of why I write. And so it was a really kind of gratifying moment for me.
That's such a good reminder that when we relate to a book, we're also relating to everyone else who's reading it,
Mhm.
probably. Yeah,
Yeah.
how beautiful. Well, thank you all for this wonderful discussion. I'll turn it back over to Jenna to close things out, but I'm so grateful that all of you were able to make it and share some of your insights. It was delightful to witness and be a part of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to piggyback off of Miriam really quick, the whole conversation was just very powerful, and I also was laughing pretty often too, like just hearing your stories and everything like that. And I can't thank you all enough for, opening up and sharing your experiences here. And thank you, Miriam, for guiding the whole conversation and keeping this awesome flow of things going. I'll open it up for questions really quick. I know we went over time a little bit. Um, if anyone has a question, please drop it in the chat, or you can use the Q&A feature here. I will share my screen one more time just to share. If you would like to win a Capstone community kindness kit, just tag us on social, use hashtag Capstone community, and we'll be picking winners tomorrow. Let us know your favorite takeaway from the session. Do we have any questions coming up in the chat? Oh, we have one from John. Is there a topic or story expansion that you have considered writing about that would support or address issues that would benefit students today? Social media, news, division, heroes, gamification, Taylor Swift, etc.
I can take that one if you'd like.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
Yeah, so obviously these are young kids, particularly like in Mr. Grizzly's class, but one of the things I would love to tackle is the news. Because, as adults, we watch the news, and that means our kids are watching too. And a lot of times they have questions that they don't ask, they just think about them in their heads. But I do know from going out on school visits and things like that, that they're talking to one another about it. And so I think a book that covered something like that, and there's a lot going on in the news, in a lot of different areas and avenues. And so I think a book like that that sort of addressed ways to bring those things up, ways to talk about them, and ways to deal with them, because just watching the news can be stressful. I know there are a lot of therapists who say don't watch the news before you go to bed, right? And so I think ways to kind of address how to deal with what's going on in the world, because I mean you don't want to be oblivious to it, you don't want to close your eyes to it, but as young people they have a lot to deal with, and I think a book that kind of covers good ways to deal with that would be helpful.
Absolutely. Anita, Saadia, did you want to add to that at all, or?
Most of the topics that I'm thinking about right now are historical fiction. So I don't know. I would have to think about that, I think.
Yeah, for me, I mean, actually, these are good ideas. I'm always looking for more ideas.
Yeah.
So you never know, this might end up in a book somewhere. Some of my older books for older kids, middle grade novels include things that are just, I mean, they're not all about, one specific thing. For example, my new middle grade novel, The Partition Project, that's coming out next week. It has a documentary project, like filmed on, the kids have to film something on their phones and then upload it to YouTube, and then people vote on it, and whoever gets the most votes or the most views wins the contest. So it's kind of, things like that can become part of a story pretty easily. It's hard to do that for a younger kid's book, just because you're constrained by number of pages and the story. But if you have a longer novel, you can definitely, and I have included a lot of things like that.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Well, I think we don't have any more questions left. We will be sending out certificates of attendance and the recording and all resources involved. Thank you everyone for attending, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you, Bryan. Thank you, Anita. Thank you,
Thank you.
Saadia. And thank you, Miriam. Have a
Thank
great
you.
night,
Thank you
everyone.
for Capstone, for putting this on and making us talk about our favorite subject.
Yeah.
Yep.
Awesome. Of course. We love it. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.